Welcome to the Private Lender Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, Chris and Jason here with the Private Lenders Podcast. Thanks for checking out the show. As always, sponsored by Hard Money Mastermind and also our Inner Circle Mastermind group. That is hardmoneymastermindinnercircle.com. Feel free to check it out if you would like to apply. We have our next meeting coming up in Nashville in November. It's a high-end group of 15 or 20 private lenders from around the country. Everyone runs their business a little bit differently. It's a really, really good collective sort of meeting and conversation. So if you're interested, check it out, hardmoneymastermindinnercircle.com. Okay, today we are talking about some default-related stuff, most specifically the many scenarios that pop up that are like borderline. A borderline, should we default them, should we not? We have these conversations month in and month out about a number of different scenarios and a few things about that. We're going to go into some examples, but when it comes to like a real default where somebody completely abandons a job or you can't get a hold of them at all, or you just know it's been stalled for many months, like you really have no choice. You move forward with foreclosure, maybe judgments depending on the situation, but those aren't really the ones that we're talking about, right? And those are rare. Those are more rare when it's like there's nothing to do here but default all the way, foreclose all the way. That doesn't happen very often. The more common scenario is like, all right, there are a couple payments behind. What should we do?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where it gets tricky, because when we talk to a lot of private lenders and hard money lenders throughout the country, you know, there's a difference between somebody being in default and you defaulting them. And what do I mean by that? Obviously, when you write your note or your attorney is writing your note and you have all your loan paperwork, it's to protect all of us as lenders and in essence, be able to do whatever we got to do to collect on the property via judgment, via foreclosure, however you want to do it in order to do so. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to. And you have to make, and it's a business decision, right? If you just ask your attorney, they're gonna be like, yep, foreclose, they're 10 days late. You can implement a late fee, you can go foreclose, you can do whatever you want to do. But in reality, and good business practice might not be that. So obviously it's important to have things in place of, I'll give you a quick example. After day 5, we charge a late fee. After day 30, typically, and they're over 30 days late, it's, hey, you need to get this in. If you go any further, we're going to get an attorney letter out the door so we can move to the next steps. But part of this episode is really like, cool, let's sit back and as a business decision, determine what's best, because there is a lot of instances where a borrower might have just run out of funds, or times are tough and they're in the process of selling the property or refinancing the property, and it might not be the best move business wise to just go full steam ahead.
Yeah, let's talk about a couple examples of a very minor default scenario that you'd probably not want to full on defaulted. So when I say defaulted, for us, that means we switch to the default rate. It's usually from 12.99 to 24. And we'll tack on an attorney fee and we'll send the payoff statement over to the attorney's office so they can send out a default letter. Okay. That's typically what we mean when we say defaulted. In the situations where we might not want to do that, even though they technically may be in default, like one payment behind, maybe 2 over the maturity date. Maybe their construction job is, according to the construction agreement, a little bit over the completion date that it's supposed to be. And like, say you have a good client who you've lent to a few times, they're a fix and flip investor, and they've gotten to the end of a job, they're tight on cash, the property's going to hit the market soon to sell, and they're like, hey, can I not make these payments and you collect them later on? Like at the time of payoff, and you'll collect, 3 or 4 months, whatever it might be, at the time of payoff. Typically, the answer is going to be yes. With somebody we know well, we know they perform well, there's no reason to bang them with default interest and attorney's fees in a case like that. Now, mind you, on the other end of things, you have a capital investor. So, it's assuming that you use investor capital, not just lending your own money. So it's good to set expectations on both sides. And it's just everything above board. Everything is transparent. Like, we would tell a capital investor in a case like that, like, look, we know this guy pretty well. We've lent to him a few times. We want to keep him as a client. We're going to get all of our interest. We don't really have to bang him for default interest, because some capital investors will say that, oh, he missed a payment, give me default interest, right? Like, and that's not always the best business decision. You don't want to lose clients for a very minor default situation like that. Same goes with maturity dates. Like, say someone's under contract to sell, it's going to go over a maturity date by like 30 or 45 days or something. There's really no fire. Like, you don't have to do all the default related stuff I just said. And like, the scripting to an investor would be the same thing.
Yeah, you made a good point. And, when when you said, hey, it's just, a minor situation. I mean, 3 or 4 months back is a lot, obviously, but regardless, like, you use common sense of what's what. I mean, if you have a borrower that's always late or always defaults and they're a pain in the ass to deal with, that's different than, hey, you have a good client and you're doing multiple deals with them a month and a year. And then all of a sudden it's like, yo, man, like, I went $50,000 over budget that I spent out of pocket. Like, I'm in a tough spot. I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up into this deal. It would be a huge favor for me if I, can hold off on payments for a few months till I get this thing sold. Right. So again, if someone's a complete pain in the neck and you're chasing them around for payments all the time, and, you're just waiting for a way that you can get them off your books and default them, that's fine. You can go that direction as well. But the point that Chris made, which is important, is it's got to be kind of transparent with your capital investor, and it's got to make sense, obviously, for both parties, right? I'll tell you a real quick story. Early on in our career, we were working with this really good group of real estate investors, and we did some really good business with them. They did a lot of deals with us. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens over the first few years. And we had a deal that they went over budget on. They went over the maturity date on. As soon as they went over the maturity date, technically, they went over the maturity date. They're in default. We could change the interest rate up to 24% in this particular state. And, in essence, we had the legal right to do that in order to collect on it. And we had a conversation with our capital investor. And, again, this was earlier on in our career. The capital investor was like, no, they're over the term. Like, I want default interest. I want my default rate. Obviously, when a loan goes to default, we take a higher servicing fee, things like that. We've talked about that in the past. But they wanted that, and we kind of put ourselves in a bad situation. And then we had to communicate with the investor, or the real estate investors, like, hey, like, listen, I know you're making all your payments on time, but you're over the loan term and I got to default you. And, it went from, back then was a 15% interest rate to a 24% interest rate. And it's a lot of money. And it was going on, it was a few months of default. And needless to say, we never did another loan with that borrower. They were pissed off, which they should have been.
They never came back.
Yeah, I would have been pissed off in that situation. And in hindsight, we made a really bad decision. And again, this is year 2, year 3, or whatever. It was early on. We didn't have things in place as we have now. And I don't think that we were upset with our capital investor at the time. I think we understood, but we just didn't set the expectations right. And we didn't do it the right way. And I think if the answer is like, hey, man, this is a good client, this is a good borrower, we're going to continue to do lots of deals with them, and we have in the past, it makes sense just to keep your money deployed at the good rate of return you're getting now anyways, and, not push it. And, so we lost, we lost a good client on that one.
Yeah, we did. Another common scenario where you oftentimes want to consider whether or not it's a wise move to default is when you know that your borrower is going to be exiting by refinance. Because if you default them, that will typically kill any refi deal. If that new lender, say it's a permanent lender, like they're getting a 30-year loan on a rental property, or maybe a 20-year loan, permanent loan on a commercial property, if they're in default on that payoff statement or on a verification of mortgage that gets sent to you, then that's usually going to kill their refinance, which kills your exit strategy. Because if you kill their refi, you're not getting out right away. It's not like 1 month later, they're like, oh, forget it, I'll just sell then. And then they're under contract. It doesn't happen that fast. So in a case like that, and I'm managing a few of them right now, where it's like, look, I'll keep this at the regular rate for you, but you have to catch up. You have to catch up at the 12.99 rate so that we can give a clean payoff statement to the new lender, and they'll approve your refi. Then we all get out, because we're a short-term lender. We want our exits. We don't want to drag out situations that don't have to be that, right? And so we're managing a few of those now. And that's one of the reasons why I was thinking about this topic for a podcast. There are just cases like that. There are just situations where you're like, ugh, it's right on the borderline between should I default or not? Or they're going to sell. Are we going to lend it? Do we want to lend to them again? Probably. That whole thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. And I think a lot of people just ask their attorneys, hey, what do I do? We'll default them. Follow the note. Like, this isn't a legal conversation.
It's not a legal question. No.
This is a business conversation of what makes the most sense. And the way that Chris said it, like, we're not, changing or manipulating anything to help them get a bank refi. That has nothing to do with it. It's, hey, be current. You're not going to get a bank refi if you're not current. So it's also educating your borrower, I think, is important. Everyone thinks no matter what their credit scores are that they're going to get out of your loans and refinance. Like, there's lots of times that we'll step in and be like, hey, listen, like, your credit score's 600. You're not getting a bank refinance at this particular case. You haven't made, you haven't made monthly payments. Like, let's be realistic. Like, we could either go foreclose on you, file a judgment against you, or you could figure out a way to pay us off as soon as possible. And maybe you do a workout where it's like, hey, I can only afford a payment now or a partial payment now. I mean, whatever you can get in from them, right? And try to get money from them now. Try to do, if you want to do a workout, do workout. We had a deal, maybe it was 2 years ago, where the monthly payment was high. And if you've been in this business long enough, like, a lot of times, the real estate investors can carry these deals for a short period of time, but if they don't flip it as quick as they want, like, the numbers are going to get tight, right? The numbers are going to get tough. And she, the construction went way over budget, and their payment was a lot. I think $6,000 a month for the monthly payment. And I'm like, what can you afford to pay? And she was like, can I pay half? $3,000. I was like, that's reasonable. Let's do that. So the way that we set it up is we ACH $3,000 a month instead of $6,000 a month, and every 2 months equaled one payment. We dispersed to the capital investor, and we disclosed that to the capital investor up front, and we didn't put them in default interest. And again, like, this isn't, hey, protect your borrower, they're the most important thing. This is, and just do what they say, and make them all happy. This isn't what we're talking about. This is, hey, case by case on the right investor as a business decision. What do you make the most sense? Because the other thing you don't want to do is just all of a sudden just jack them. Hey, I'm going to charge you late fees, and I'm going to charge you default interest, and I'm going to charge you extension fees. And then next thing you know, like, there's no way for them to get out of the project, and they can't exit. So, we're not all that much, we've done other podcasts and trainings related to, extension fees and modifications and things like that. I think the point that we're trying to get across is use your best judgment and communicate with your investors, communicate with your borrowers, your clients, and determine, does it make sense for you to default them or not? And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But if someone, like Chris started this episode with, if someone ghosts you and you can't get a hold of them, default them immediately. Because depending on what state you're in, the process does take time. So you want to get that thing going as quick as possible.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the moral of the story here on this podcast is it's not, we know what the legal docs say, what the loan documents say. We know what the legal answer would be. It's a business decision of, how to not shut down your own exits, be fair enough to a good borrower, also take care of your capital investor, of course. And that's part of this business, is juggling those different relationships, you being in charge of the whole loan and transaction and servicing and everything. So hope you got something from that. Hopefully maybe there's a takeaway of some deal that you're working on currently. Maybe this will help you think a little bit differently about it, look at that situation differently. And like I started with before, if you do want to take the next step in the Hard Money Mastermind, check out Hard Money Mastermind innercircle.com to make application. And we will see you here next time on the Private Lenders Podcast.
Bye, guys. Check you later. We will see everybody soon. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.